From the studios of Cue Ball Media in New York, this is the Create Your New Normal podcast. I'm your host, Anthony Quinones, and I will interview and share stories of people who have successfully reinvented themselves. They'll talk about the obstacles and challenges they faced and overcame to create their new normal. We'll look at what they did, how they did it, why they did it, and I know it will inspire you to get you from your A, where you are now, to your B, where you want to be. So are you ready to create your new normal? Well, let's get it. This is the Create Your New Normal podcast, episode number 6. And I'm excited to introduce to you my guest. My guest is a business executive, revenue strategist, organizational leadership expert, author, and speaker based in the Seattle area. She currently serves as President and Chief Revenue Officer of Criteria Corp, a company focused on pre-employment assessments and talent decision-making. Throughout her career, she has held senior leadership positions in the technology, HR tech, logistics, and automotive sectors. In recent years, she has become a prominent voice on the future of work, AI's impact on hiring and organizational leadership, skill-based learning, and leadership workplace culture. And she is a mother of 4. Okay, and then when you're a mother of 4, you're definitely a Cedar organizational leader. And she's my guest today. My guest today is Melissa McCann-Tilton. Melissa, welcome to Create Your New Normal.
Thanks, Anthony. Nice to be here.
All right, great. So I saw you speak at a business expo in New York last month, and you had me from the word go. You went on for about 4 to 5 minutes. I mean, that's all it was. But it was very riveting. I kicked myself afterwards because right after you spoke, I dipped out. Didn't get a chance to shake your hand, but your speech really did a lot for me. It really impacted me a lot. So, I'm getting older, so my memory is not what it used to be. But from what I remember, I think you spoke about your father, how the sales process has changed, your personal reinvention, and the future of work. Is that fairly accurate?
Yep. That was it.
Yeah, all that in 4
it.
minutes, okay? That's pretty amazing.
Wow.
You touched on a lot of things, and I definitely want to expand on those things a little bit. So, first you talked about your father and sales, and you also talked about how sales has changed over the years, and we know the process has changed a lot, with the internet and other things that have come forth. Why don't you talk a little bit about your father, sales, and how that's changed over the years?
Yeah, I think everyone's origin story in some way shapes how they approach their work. And that's part of why that talk includes that. And frankly, that's a fairly new part of me speaking in rooms, is talking more personally about how my background has shaped my leadership approach, has shaped my approach to business, to sales, to revenue generation, and even the industries that I've selected to be in. And it's not always positive, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think that's one of the things that I allude to in that very short talk. And I talk more expansively about in some of my other talks. I grew up in a very bizarre situation, and my father was a grifter. He used religion as a grift. And so I had a perspective when I got into the business world. I was like, oh, I understand this, because it felt a little bit like the grift. There was a manipulation to the process. And I think that I fell into the comfort of that. If that sounds strange, it should. Mm-hmm. But I think that it was a comfortable feeling to me because it felt so familiar. And I think as I grew my career, I really was rewarded for, things that ultimately later didn't feel authentic to me. Mm-hmm. They were well trained into my behaviors, my psychology, and walking into the business world, especially in automotive in the 1990s, sir. Um, the automotive industry was a pretty abusive, tough place, especially if you're a woman, but really for
Mm-hmm.
anybody. And it just felt natural. And I think as my career has evolved over the years, I've really gone from believing that sales, revenue production is sort of about, you hear all these metaphors, right? It's like war metaphors and
Mm.
fighting metaphors and
Yeah.
brutality and man, I could do that. But it never felt right. And I think that as my careers evolved, and especially as humans and methods and more connections have evolved, especially in HR tech where I am now, I don't find that the brutality works anymore. I mean, it's trending right
Mm-hmm.
now, but I don't think it produces authentic growth. And if you look at what's happening in the economy today and the distribution of wealth, it's evidence that it doesn't work. I mean, it works for a couple of guys, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Few people. And it's
People.
funny you mentioned about the sales process, just how you have all these metaphors of war, and then you got the car, and it's basically a man's world, right? It's a man's way of looking at how to dominate, how to take over, how to make somebody do what they want to do, arm wrestling, twisting arms. And I can imagine that's kind of a foreign concept, right? Because I mean, you're a woman, you step into this, and it's like, yeah, this is how it works, but I don't really feel good about doing it this way. I want to come up with another way of doing this that feels authentic to me.
I think I got there eventually, but
Yeah.
frankly, I got Manland. I understood it. Like it
Mm-hmm.
felt super comfortable to me for decades. I understood how to work in it. I understood how to relate to it. And I think it's only been in the last, 5 years. One of the things I don't mention in the shorter talk is one of my very best friend passed from cancer about three
Oh.
years ago. And it really transformed how I thought about business, how I thought about life, how I felt about everything. And I think only then was I able to get in contact with my femininity and sort of recognize that there was a different way that you could
Mm-hmm.
bring in. And what I find is when I bring that different method in, it's not just the women who like it. We have men in this world that are just starved for a different method. Like, my
Mm-hmm.
God, this is exhausting. Do we have to keep
Yeah.
doing it this way? So I think it's all for everybody.
Yeah, it's tough because when you're trying to force people to do something that they don't want, on the other side they don't want to do it, and so to get to those people, you're going to have to come up with a different method. And I think that we've come partially there. I mean, we're on our way there because we have more choices than we had before. So you can't pigeonhole people into things as easily as you once did because it's like, hey, I can do this another way. Um,
Yeah.
you also touched on your personal reinvention, and you've even touched on it right here. Why don't you tell us a little bit about your personal reinvention journey to where you are today?
Hmm. Yeah, I do think a lot of it relates to going through the death experience with my best friend. I mean, she was 49 when she passed. She has two young
Mm.
kids, and that was a pretty, difficult, in some ways brutal, in some ways full of grace kind of experience. And I think through that lens, like you talk to people who have near death experiences and their whole lives change. It was like that for me. It was
Mm-hmm.
like my near death experience. It was like going through this very deep, grounded wake up call kind of moment.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, my reflection on everything I had done in my life up to that point, it was a outsourcing of my self-worth. I
Mm-hmm.
was seeking self-worth outside of myself. So I would put myself in situations where I had to prove the next thing and prove the next thing. And I think many of us do this. I mean, I'm surrounded by people who are sort of striving to finally be okay. And what I
Mm-hmm.
realized through that experience is for all the striving, you get there and there you are. it's still just you.
Yeah.
And you think you need the next thing to sort of fill the hole. And I think that the realization I've come to is you can't seek something that you already are.
Mm.
You're already there.
Yeah.
And it really has changed a lot of how I approach growth, how I approach goals, how I approach experiencing business experience. I'm like having the quarter of my life right now. It's a very important, you have a lot of goals to hit. And I think past versions of me would just be ripping heads off and beating people up. And this version of me, which I think is far more productive, just comes alongside the team and is with them as we work through issues with customers, issues with prospects, opportunities. Like it's not a struggle. It's an experience, and everything is about learning and being grounded in that. And it's just a very different method of working.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned about success, because you hear this sometimes with people that get to the pinnacle, like in in the entertainment industry. It's almost they get there and then it's like, that's it. There's so much more to life than just hitting the pinnacle and hitting these goals. And you mentioned just how you go about it has to change. You talk a lot about the future of work, and we're going to park on that for a good while. And in your riveting 4-minute talk, you talked about the future of work and the disruption in the future of work. Why don't you talk to our audience a little bit about that, because I think that's a very important concept for our future.
Yeah, you think about one of the concepts we talk a lot about at Criteria and just in general is sort of the versions of work that have come before. So if you think of work 1.0 as sort of, the Industrial Revolution, work 2.0 is, you think of like the Mad Men era, right? Where we had filing cabinets and lots of hierarchy. There were paper memos and legal pads. And then you proceed into work 3.0, which was the digital era, right? Like the internet. And, I remember in the 90s running around the country talking to CMOs at car companies, trying to convince them that people were going to buy cars on the internet. And they were like, that's insane. It's never going to happen, right? So you encounter these big transition moments, and it sort of changes how work functions. And I think that's important because we, as humans, are interacting with work. And I think that I hear a lot of people talk about exhaustion or burnout. And I don't think it's the work that is the burnout. I think work is just a place where we're trying to prove our self-worth. And that's exhausting. And so if you think about this next era of work, what's about to happen is we're going to be able to outsource a bunch of tasks that, frankly, nobody ever really liked doing in the first place. And that's the advent of AI. Now, we can make really good decisions about how to do that and balance that work so that humans can have richer, fuller, more expansively growing lives, or we can think of that as an efficiency problem. It just brings people in harder and sort of wrecks them. And I think that's a big risk. There's decisions that we, as business leaders, as humans, need to make in the next couple of years that will balance how this ends up. And it could end up being like a beautiful, balanced, new work paradigm where we don't have to work as much, we don't have to grind as much. Or it could be dystopian. Like we have a bunch of people losing jobs and more consolidation of wealth and things like that. That could be quite difficult. And I hope we make the right decisions.
So how do you think So how can we make the right decisions so that we can have more of what you said originally? We may not work as much. We may just outsource tasks that we don't really want to do anyway. So it frees up time. So how can we get there as opposed to the other method where you have, people losing their jobs, people burned out, that have jobs, and just have, more of the same that we've had for the last, 10, 15 years?
Yeah, I think there's two things. One, I think HR leaders really need to play the main character role right now. And I'm encouraging HR leaders as much as I can, as much as I interact with them, to really walk into the space of architect right now, not a business support, a business architect, because we have to design the human jobs consciously and carefully, or it will happen by accident. And I can't tell you how many things I see happen in business by like accident and osmosis. You walk around in a business and you say, why is it that way? And like nobody really knows. It happened a long time ago and we just kept doing it like that, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I think really being conscious about the architecture of human jobs right now is the first part that's important. The second part is a little more nuanced, and I think it has to do with us as humans. I think, and I talked a little bit about this in New York when you saw me.
Mm-hmm.
This relates back to my origin story. We as humans have to be able to let go of productivity as the definition of our self-worth. Because as long as we define hard work and external achievement as our identities, we will doom ourselves. We will fight to put ourselves in grindy, terrible, efficiency type roles because we won't be able to let it go.
Yeah, and we're going to end up more like the second, the dystopian method where people just get burnt out, people lose their jobs, people leave jobs. I know of a lot of people, I'm a perfect example actually, of leaving a toxic job without having one, to replace it. Because it just, just the culture is so bad, the positions, just a lot of what you said is just going to lead to that. You talked at first about HR being an architect. That's really interesting because obviously HR is the hiring, they do the hiring, and there's so many jobs, so many titles that don't match the description. And there's so many descriptions that, are incomplete. So talk to me a little bit about, like I said, this is really interesting what you mentioned. Like say a job posting, okay? We have an opening for a senior accountant position, okay? HR, you can kind of just throw some, description out there without much thought. Then you end up taking the job and it's not what you saw online. So how important is it for HR to get something like a job description right as the architect of, the talent in the company?
It's extremely important, and it's really weird right now. So let me talk to you about how weird it's gotten. So as AI has come more into our businesses and especially our applicant tracking systems, we're using those applicant tracking systems to post the jobs, right? You put the job description, you post the job, applicants come in and apply, you get all the resumes, and then the ATS is using AI most of the time to filter down to get to a better fit of resumes. Well, one of the phenomenons that's emerging is that applicants are now pervasively using AI to write their resumes. So you can write a script. It's pretty easy to do. Where you go in and you say, write me resumes for job applications for customer service roles, and customize them to each customer service role and apply. And so you have applicants that literally have never even looked at the job description that show up to a phone interview. They don't even know what job it is because they ran a script to apply to hundreds of jobs. And I understand the motivation for this because you're up against hundreds of other candidates. You've got to get it out there, and now you have this tool. The bizarre thing is the ATSs and the AI that they're using prefers the AI written resume. It likes itself. So it turns into an echo chamber. So the HR leader is now accidentally excluding human written resumes because the AI likes itself better. Is drawing in applicants that have used AI to write their resumes and maybe don't have any of the experience that they've represented. And they get into the job and half, a full half of people are failing now in the first 6 months.
Wow.
It's trillions of dollars in loss, and it's just getting worse. And it's sort of like amped up in the last 6 months. So there's this sort of tsunami, if you will, of candidates. And then this other tsunami of lack of signal, and then we put people in jobs that they never should have been put in the first place. And it's bad for the candidate, it's bad for the company, and it's unintentional.
That's a lot there. We can go in. Yeah, I'm learning a lot right here. This is the Create Your New Normal podcast. Anthony Quinones is your host, and President Chief Revenue Officer of Criteria Corp, Melissa McCann-Tilton, is my guest. And please like, rate, review, share, and subscribe to this podcast on YouTube and Apple Podcasts. It would mean a lot to me. So, going back to what you just mentioned, it's pretty riveting. Do you ever think this is going to be a time where, I mean, we're not going to go all the way back, okay, to, to where we were before. But in terms of AI, with AI, I guess, designed to help HR, but as you've mentioned, in a lot of ways, it hurts HR. Do you think that we'll ever go back, again, not totally, but go back to a time where human element will be a bigger factor? Before you answer that, a friend and I went out to lunch the other day, and he mentioned to me that AI, that these companies are using AI to do customer service, but as people, we like to have humans. So I would say, based on that probably the companies that still use the human element will come out further ahead because that's what the consumers want. Do you think that we will go back to a time where humans are more involved in the hiring process, where, okay, we know that AI is going to help to get rid of a lot of these candidates, but we still need people to look at these candidates, these other candidates, because we're missing out on a lot of good candidates using AI?
Yeah, it was interesting. Last week, SHRM had their national conference in Orlando, and my team was there. And Anthony, there was a real backlash against AI in a lot of the speeches and conversation. And I think it relates to that unintentionality that I talked about before. If you just sort of let it happen, if you don't architect it, you end up accidentally in a bad place. And I think that's what we're seeing with that tsunami. It's sort of an accident, but we're recognizing it. And as we recognize it, we can step back from it and then architect it, design it the way it should be, right?
Yeah. Yes. So going further, you mentioned that the next 3 to 5 years would be the most disruptive in work history. So we've come a long way to get where we are now, and as you've mentioned, and a lot of job seekers are not too happy with the way things are going. But it's going to continue, okay? We're not going to stop here. So why do you say that the next 3 to 5 years may be the most disruptive in our work history?
I think because those decisions have to be made, and they're either going to be made well or they're going to be made poorly. If you think about a really positive way to approach this, let's just take the contrast of that job description that you were talking about. You know, before in even in the today times, like the today times right now, we still primarily seek hard skills when we're doing interviews. We're looking for, have you done this thing before? Have you used this piece of software? Have you said these words before? Have you done this kind of job before? We're not as frequently looking for potential, learning ability, adaptability, creativity. And there's ways to do that. And in the future of work, that will become far more important. Those skills, that adaptability, will become the key to what work should be. So if we architect in a way where we're observing human skills, we're designing human jobs to really leverage that generalist kind of approach, that human creativity and human ingenuity, we place the human skills correctly, then we'll be able to leverage AI instead of have it consume us.
Great stuff. I was looking at one of your articles, and definitely everybody, if you're on LinkedIn, connect, follow Melissa McCann-Tilton. She has a great newsletter titled Work 4.0. And one of your articles, you had mentioned that your latest research showed that 71% of talent leaders say that they've moved toward the skill-based hiring, which is what we want, right? But in reality, that's not true. It's much lower. I think you said it was more like 23, 24%. So we're telling people that the way we're looking for candidates has changed, but in the reality, it hasn't. So all these things that you talked about, adaptability, potential, those are kind of foreign words because so much of AI is about getting someone who exactly fits this mold. And so this person has to have done this job, done this, used this software, work for this type of company. And again, we eliminate tons of candidates who have potential to learn and grow into a position. Now, let's talk about skills and adaptability. Now, this show we talk about reinvention, which is really a lot about adaptability, about moving from your A to your B. And so usually the B is foreign territory. So how can we use these attributes, potential, learning ability, adaptability, to create what we call our new normal?
Yeah, we talk about, we use the term talent signal. And I think it's really important to have different talent signals in the future as we move forward. I think one of the things, and I mentioned this in the article, one of the things that we're challenged with is I think in our heart of hearts, desire to do skills-based hiring, but we're not necessarily applying the right method to do skills-based hiring, to do that adaptability kind of hiring. Most of the time we're relying on a resume or an application. And there's methods we can test people cognitively. We can allow people to express personality traits that are transferable. And we do this in our business all the time. We have people, I frequently hire people that have no sales background, but they were in hospitality. And they're great salespeople because they have adaptable skills. They have transferable skills. And I think that if you're just relying on work history, pedigree, where you went to college, I mean, increasingly, I have kids that are in college, and I have kids that are considering going to college that may not go to college. And you think about that, like for our generation, I was just talking to some friends about this the other evening, like for our generation, like that was the way out. Like you had to go to college, right? They don't think about it that way anymore. No. It's almost like, why would I do that? It's going to be a lot of money. and I'm still going to struggle to get a job. And so the mentality is really changing around some of these institutions.
Yeah.
So we as companies are relying on these old paradigms because that's just what we thought when we were coming through.
Mm-hmm.
We're going to miss a whole set of talent, a labor pool that is fully capable, and we will ignore them because we're relying on old signals. So I really think it's about changing those talent signals that we're using to identify talent and being open-minded.
Yeah. Yeah, it's funny you mentioned the old paradigm, the 40-40 paradigm where, you had to go to college and you worked 40 years, 40 hours a week, etc. And, the cost of college was not nearly as high as it is now, of course. And I think it's outpaced inflation. So now kids are doing the numbers, well, not kids, but, college students, they're doing the numbers and they're adding it. It's like, okay, I'm going to be spending this much money for 4 years, not making any money. And then when I get out, I'm not guaranteed to get a job that's going to pay back my student loans. So they're weighing it. And a lot of people are not, going with that option anymore. I know if I had to do it all over again, I would still go to college, but not everybody thinks that way. And it makes a lot of sense, the way you presented it. And I think also this paradigm, it goes back again to what you mentioned earlier about productivity and the bottom line. When you make a hire and it doesn't work, it's like, you get smacked. You're not, it has a big effect on your career. So HR people are not, going to be quick to hire a risky person, so to speak. They're going to look for someone that fits, these criteria that, we've been living by for so long. Let's go back to your example of hospitality, all right? So let's say that I'm in the hospitality business, okay? I've worked at the Hilton. I've worked at, Courtyard by Marriott. 15 years in the hospitality industry. I've worked, let's go down my resume, okay? I've worked in cleaning the rooms, then I moved up to the concierge, and then I started to be an assistant manager at the hotel, handling all the aspects of customer service, hospitality, etc. And now I'm coming to your company to be a salesperson. What are some things that you would be looking for in my resume, in my past? And of course, if you want to interview me, you'd find out a lot more. But what are some things that you would pull out of my resume that could be helpful to your company?
I'm probably not going to look at your resume.
Okay.
That's an honest answer. I'm probably not going to look at your resume.
Okay.
Because you can change your resume for every single job, it's just become an irrelevant signal to me.
Okay.
So I'll look at your LinkedIn because you can't really change that for every job. Like that's pretty representative of who you represent yourself to be out in the public world. But more importantly, and I'll give you an example of somebody I just hired into a sales role and into an enterprise sales role. I used a cognitive test to measure her cognitive ability, and I used a personality test to measure whether she would be a good fit. And I use these assessments every single time I hire. And they've been around for a long time. They're very science-based. They're very fair. They're very balanced. And I think that's one of the reasons we use them. Well, she was a vice president at mattress firm for decades. Like she was a regional manager selling mattresses. And she wanted to get into tech sales. And I think had I not used those talent signals, those tools to assess her and understand her capabilities, I would have passed on her. Because I would have been like, you've never done SaaS sales, you've never done tech sales, you've never been in a marketplace business. I would have just been generally dismissive. And I think that many of us as hiring managers are that. And I think HR leaders need to educate hiring managers on really what the successful predictive traits are that produce an employee that fits with the job, that will be happy in the job, that will be retained in the job. And she's been fabulous. She's been fabulous, but it's because she had skills like flexibility and adaptability. It's because
Mm-hmm.
she has skills like she really likes people. She likes to be around people. And well, this is a job where you really need to like people. You need to be around people. And so there
Mm-hmm.
were a lot of this transferable potential that I was able to identify in a candidate like that otherwise you just don't see. You would walk past that resume every single time.
Hmm. Yeah, it's funny you mentioned the resume is not the factor anymore, and more like LinkedIn. So that's a good thing to remember here. And LinkedIn is in many cases has replaced the resume. So focus on your LinkedIn, not all the stuff with your resume. Uh, PSA for everybody. Um, so you talked about transferable potential. Okay. So for our audience, what are some ways that we can look at the transferable potential in us? Like we may not see how what we've done relates to a particular job, but our experience is something that can be valuable in the future, depending on the situation. So, how would you help somebody to recognize their transferable potential?
That's a great question. I think this is the source of most suffering in life. We have these expectations as humans for ourselves that we get locked into. And I, I've watched countless people around me that have this deep sense of like, this is how my life is supposed to go. This is what's supposed to happen. I'm supposed to have this job in this order, or this career path in this order, or this marriage in this order. And
Mm-hmm.
when you get so locked in to an inflexible position, it causes you to walk past opportunities.
Mm-hmm.
And I know my own experience, life is not linear. It's
That's right.
just not linear. So there's a lot of times, and I look back on, even when I moved out of automotive into other industries, I'd been in automotive for a really long time, Anthony. It was like almost 2 decades. And in some ways, I thought that was a death sentence. I'm never getting out of here.
Hmm.
Nobody's ever going to hire me because there's, like sometimes a perception of people in certain industries that maybe, you know, they operate at a different pace. It's all those things that I'm talking about, those resume type assumptions. I dismissed that person because of something on that piece of paper. So
Mm-hmm.
I really had to battle both myself and how I positioned myself to get out of the automotive industry because I had all these skills and
Mm-hmm.
I had to convince people that I could use these skills in a SaaS business. But getting through that mental definition that the world places on you is
Mm-hmm.
hard. And having the personal flexibility to go, it may not be an up and to the right kind of next role. I may
Mm-hmm.
need to go down and to the left for a minute or around in a circle or
Right.
I just have to have a flexible mindset to be able to sort of transfer into another place. And I think that's really, if you can't get to that flexibility in yourself, that neuroplasticity, that openness,
Mm-hmm.
you'll eat yourself alive. And I've watched people do it. I've watched people just fall apart very sadly, that are
Mm-hmm.
very skilled and very capable, but it's not going the way it's supposed to.
Mm-hmm. I think you went up there for a minute.
Oh,
Yeah, I can relate. If my life went the way I had planned, it would not be as good as it is now. And I think about just simple things like finding a girlfriend or finding a place to live. Those are all things that kind of happen without my planning. So I think there's definitely some truth to that. Um, and also going back to you, you said that you were in the automotive business for a couple of decades and you got out. You touched on that a little bit. What are some things in your past and your work history that you drew on or draw it out to find your next position?
Yeah, I mean, it was those skills. It was getting back to the potential and the skills that were transferable. So, I had sold a lot of things at pretty high enterprise levels when I was in the automotive industry, and I had to really leverage that
Mm-hmm.
as the way to transition into a new industry. Like finding your core skills, like what are the things that I can do? And I think more importantly, and frankly, I'm still working on this one. What are the things you really want to do?
Mm.
And I think for a long time, I thought the want to do part was like, that's for rich people. Like you get to want to do something, but I think, that windy path that you talk about in your own life, I think when your passion begins to be aligned with what your capabilities are, that's when things open up. And
Yeah.
and I'm only just now getting that.
Mhm. Yeah, it really clicks. It's funny you mentioned that because this podcast, I had done couple of podcasts in the past, but I was chatting with a friend of mine last year, and I was telling him about some of the things I had done. He told me that I have a great way of speaking with people, getting people to speak, to talk about stuff. And I was like, oh wow, I never really thought of it that way, but um, sometimes you have abilities that you don't realize that you have, and sometimes you have to really dig deep or have someone dig deep for you and tell you that you can do more than you're currently doing. So I've learned a lot today. I really appreciate you speaking at the expo for those few minutes, and it's great to have you for a few more minutes here, sharing your life, sharing a lot of great stuff with our audience. Definitely thank you very much, Melissa, for being a guest on Create Your New Normal, and love for us to keep in touch.
Let's do it.
All right, great. Looking forward to learning from you about the future of work. So thank you again. That is Melissa McCann-Tilton, President and Chief Revenue Officer of Criteria Corp. Well, I hope you enjoyed this episode of Create Your New Normal. And don't just listen. Like, share, subscribe, rate, and review this show at Apple Podcasts and on YouTube. And for more information on how you can create your new normal, visit createyournewnormal.com to learn how to reinvent yourself on your terms, not someone else's. That's createyournewnormal.com. Well, that's all for now. And until next time, I'm your host, Anthony Quinones, inspiring you to create your new normal. Take care and God bless.